What is up, everybody? It's FishStix here, and I'm back with another video where I want to dive into the top 25 esports titles that I think you should watch and know about in 2019. Now, when people talk about the esports industry and the top games, you usually think about maybe the top 10 or 15 titles out there. I would personally argue there are at least 25 esports titles that have legitimate pro scenes with legitimate tournament structures, prize money, fan bases, viewership, and so on. So I wanted to take some time and break down my personal top 25. Now, please keep in mind that this is just my highly subjective opinion, and there really isn't a hard rubric I'm using to define these tiers. This is kind of my gut feeling based on 7, 8, 9, 10 years working in the esports industry, following trends, following viewership, things like that. So without further ado, let's jump into my top 25. All right, definitely keep in mind I've got a bit of a Western bias here. I'm not super in tune with Crossfire and all these Korean, Chinese esports titles. So this is mostly the Western point of view, focused mostly on what I'm seeing through Twitch, YouTube, social media. First off is our Tier 1 esports. Now, the top 4 of this list are pretty easy, and I think absolutely everyone would agree with these exact games, and probably in this exact order too. And obviously number 1 is League of Legends. With 14.5 million in prize money in 2018, and of course some of the best and biggest events in the largest esports stadiums with the most viewers. Who can forget, of course, League of Legends. League of Legends is unique because it is truly global. Most people think of League of Legends as LCS and LEC for North America and Europe, and maybe LCK. But you kind of have to look a little bit deeper and realize that you have tournaments like the Japanese League of Legends esports events. You have Southeast Asia. You have Turkey with its own League of Legends leagues. No other esport has this kind of infrastructure that goes all the way from the top down to every single individual sub-region. Obviously, Worlds is the most watched esport event of the entire year, with many tens and tens of, if not hundreds of millions of people tuning in from around the world, from China to South America to Japan, North America, Europe, Russia, Turkey, and so on. That's why I would give League of Legends easily the number 1 spot. Number 2 here, especially if you're looking towards Western viewership, has got to be Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Counter-Strike in 2018 continued its trend of having the highest peak concurrent viewership for a single channel on Twitch throughout the entire year. We're talking over 1.1 million people tuning in on a single channel for CSGO majors in 2018, with something like 1.3 to 1.4 million concurrent viewers tuning in at the peak of a CSGO major. Of course, you've got 22.6 million in prize money. It doesn't put it at the number 1 slot, but in terms of viewership, hype, mainly those two things, Counter-Strike is pretty easily number 2 in my opinion. Number 3 is Dota 2. This one has by far the biggest prize pool in esports and has for many years consecutively. Primarily, this is due to the Internationals prize pool, which is crowdfunded through the compendium purchases that you, the Dota fan, have put your hard-earned money into. But that brings the total up to $41 million in 2018. Dota 2 has consistent viewership throughout the year with majors, minors, and of course TI is another event that peaks at about 1 million concurrent viewers just on Twitch. Number 4 is Overwatch. Love it or hate it, there's a lot of haters out there. Overwatch has solidified its spot as the number 4th most viewed esports, at least in the West, and it's really no question about that. You know, a lot of people were very skeptical going into Overwatch League if it was a good idea, if it was just a overinflation of the esports market, if Overwatch was watchable enough, but at very least, you cannot argue that Overwatch is solidly the number 4 most watched esport in the Western world. This is because Overwatch League consistently gets in the 80,000 to 150,000 concurrent viewers for regular play days of Overwatch League. Not a big tournament here and big tournament there, but on a daily basis, 4 days a week, Thursday through Sunday, you're going to be seeing 100,000 or more viewers. Season 2 has actually started off even better than I had originally thought. Season 1 of Overwatch League, there was tens of millions of dollars pumped into marketing that thing. Season 2, not so much, yet viewership has remained very, very steady, which is why I think Overwatch League is solidly number 4 on my list here. Okay, number 5. This is where we start to get a little bit contentious. I think depending on who you are, what community you like, and what you justify as esports viewership, number 5 could be very different for a lot of people. But for a whole bunch of reasons, I'm going to have to give this one to Fortnite. Now, I'm not a Battle Royale player or watcher, and frankly, Fortnite esports has barely even begun. We haven't really seen many major Fortnite esports events. For the most parts, it's been celebrity tournaments, pro AMs, and a few open tournaments here or there with qualifiers. That said, Epic has announced $100 million in prize pools for one of the biggest games in the world in terms of player base in 2019. I think there's no doubt that once these events really start rolling, depending if they're pro events or even all the way down to, I guess down is kind of subjective, but even if it's something like a celebrity event, I think you're still going to consider it esports as long as there are qualifiers and qualification processes and, just a system which leads towards the best of the best. So in my opinion, Fortnite should easily be in the top 5. All right, that covers it for what I consider tier 1 esports. I think these top 5 are head and shoulders kind of above the rest of the pack. And tier 2 is kind of where I lump in the most of the rest of the esports ecosystems and communities. And let's just get started. All right, this is another area where it's going to start to get very contentious. There are a lot of highly subjective reasons why I put these games in the order that I did. And I know a lot of you guys aren't going to agree with me, but I'm just going to go ahead and give my perspective on what makes up the tier 2 esports scene, starting with Call of Duty. Okay, I know Call of Duty has a very specific audience, mainly of console fans. So as a PC esports player, I didn't necessarily think I would be putting this game so high up on the list as the top 6 biggest esport to look out for in 2019. But Call of Duty World League has actually been doing much better than I had personally thought it would, and I think a lot of other people as well. Call of Duty World League is consistently bringing in 30 to 50,000 concurrent viewers for regular play days. Similar to Overwatch League, there's a lot of consistent broadcasts, and these broadcasts are bringing in consistent viewership. Of course, when there's a Call of Duty major, you can see upwards of 100,000 or more viewers, depending on how deep Optic went into the bracket. You could see even more. For these reasons, and also the fact that there's rumors that Call of Duty will be a franchised league in 2019, similar to Overwatch League, I believe Call of Duty is rightfully in the 6th spot. The next one is a game very near and dear to my heart, and that is Smash Bros. Ultimate. Smash Bros. Does not have the esports prize money or the production values of any games probably in the top 15 here. What Smash Bros. Does have, though, is one of the best-selling franchises and best-selling individual titles of the last decade. Smash Bros. Ultimate went from, oh man, this is a pretty good game, to, oh my god, it's way better than I thought, to, holy shit, this game is outselling pretty much any other $60 premium game in the history of video games. I actually mean that literally. This is by far the best-selling Smash Bros. It's only been out since December, so it's only been out a couple of months, of all time. We've seen Melee players joining in, Smash Bros. Brawl players joining in. Of course, a ton of the Smash 4 community is joining in. So it's really the amalgamation of all of the biggest Smash titles over the last 15 years. And I think that Smash has a huge, huge potential future ahead of it. The only reason I didn't actually put this above Call of Duty is because of how inconsistent the tournament scene is. You might go a couple weeks without even having a legitimately major Smash Bros. Event. When there is a major like Genesis 6, for instance, which was in my hometown of Oakland, you're going to see 100,000 plus concurrent viewers easily. But that only happens once a month or even once every other month. There can be an entire weekend without, or an entire week without a really legitimate Smash Bros. Major, which I think makes Smash very unique. Almost every esport title in the top 15 or even the top 20 is going to have much more consistent tournaments than Smash Bros does. All right, next on the list is Rainbow Six. Rainbow Six is a sleeper hit that came out a couple of years ago and didn't really pop off as an esport until much later. It has slowly but consistently gotten new patches, new updates, and really strong support from Ubisoft and ESL running the Rainbow Six Pro League. It has gone from a game that people probably didn't even think about as a top esport to something that's regularly getting over 100 to 200,000 concurrent viewers for Rainbow Six majors. I don't play the game myself, so I don't have a ton more to say about it than that, but it has consistently surprised me as one of the best esports titles from a viewership perspective. Next up, we have Rocket League. Rocket League exploded onto the esports scene just a couple of years ago, really shortly after the game came out, because let's just be honest, it is so fun to watch. This game appeals to everyone from hardcore esports fans because you can really see the high level of skill that the game takes and the high level of team coordination, all the way down to somebody that's never watched esports before. It's a great entry-level esport that you should show your mom, your aunt, or your brother who doesn't watch esports. Psyonix has also done a lot to build structure around Rocket League. So you have collegiate events, you have the Rocket League Championship Series with feeders and qualifiers, all leading into a major prize pool event at the end of the year. Last year saw $2.3 million in prizing, and I'm expecting similar levels of viewership this year as well. Now, the only thing I'd mention is while Rocket League can still consistently get good viewership for its regular play days and peak at over 100,000 concurrent viewers, it actually did the RLCS finals, this most recent RLCS finals, actually peaked slightly below the previous one. It was still very good viewership, which is why it's still up this high, but it's not exactly growing at the same rate it once was. Next up, we have StarCraft 2. StarCraft 2 really started it all for esports in 2008 in this kind of new generation of esports, I would say. 2008, 2009, 2010, the beta came out, and this was right when live streaming was invented. Like, live streaming was not possible, not feasible prior to Justin TV, Ustream, Livestream, and Own3D launching right in that time frame. And it's actually thanks to StarCraft 2 that Twitch even exists in the first place. The Justin TV co-founders Emmett Shear, Kevin Lin, Justin Kahn, they really enjoyed watching StarCraft 2 broadcasts when the beta had just come out, and that they saw that this was one of the fastest growing verticals on Justin TV, which eventually pushed them to end up launching Twitch. Relatively, StarCraft continues to sort of dip in the rankings of top esports titles. It used to be the king. It used to be number one. Now it is very far from it. But that doesn't mean that StarCraft is losing momentum as an esports title. It's just in relative to the rest of the esports industry, which has gotten way, way, way bigger, StarCraft has remained relatively consistent. I would say this is going to be a great year for StarCraft because last year ended with such an amazing moment where Serral, a Finnish player, took out all of the top Korean players to win BlizzCon last year for the very first time that a non-Korean player has won a tournament of that scale. This was such a hype moment that really broadened the reach, I think, of StarCraft in general. And I'm really looking forward to watching WCS, which has been consistently getting 15 to 25,000 concurrent viewers for regular play days, as well as events like Intel Extreme Masters and the major StarCraft events throughout the year, which can regularly get over 50 to 60,000 concurrent viewers. All right, next up on the list is NBA 2K. Now, I don't watch many sports games at all. I don't watch sports esports religiously, but NBA 2K League has launched with a similar franchising model to what we've seen from Overwatch League, and done surprisingly well. This game was not really on my radar as a top esport, but again, it can consistently, for regular playdays, and this is a theme I'm coming back to, regular but consistent viewership that's not blowing your mind with 100,000 plus viewers, but 10, 20, 30,000 concurrent viewers for lots and lots and lots of play days, which we're looking forward to seeing in 2019. That makes it a top esports title. All right, Street Fighter. Now, I know probably if you're part of the fighting game community, you're wondering, you're scratching your head, why is Street Fighter so far down on the list? You know, this isn't even considered a top 10 esport, in my opinion, at this point. And that bums me out, by the way. I am a huge Street Fighter fan. The first esports event that I ever went to was NorCal Regionals back in 2009. This year, NorCal Regionals was happening in San Jose. It's actually happening right now, today. And honestly, the production value looks exactly the same. You know, Street Fighter V had a really rocky start, which did not help. But the fighting game community has not evolved at the same pace that we've seen other esports titles and other esports communities evolve in terms of production value for events, better quality streams and more viewership, you know, increase in sponsorships and prize pools. That has not happened in the fighting game community to the same level that it's happened to other esports titles. Now, I would actually say that Street Fighter V is in a much better spot than it has been. Just as somebody that likes to watch it, I've really been enjoying watching Street Fighter majors, particularly NCR yesterday was super hyped to watch. I can't wait to watch the finals later today. So with $500,000 in prizing for the Capcom Pro Tour once again, and additional prize pools, you know, sprinkled throughout the season, Street Fighter can still regularly get 40 to 60,000 plus concurrent viewers. The only unfortunate part there is that Street Fighter 4 for majors like NorCal Regionals used to be able to get over 80,000 concurrent viewers. So we've actually seen a slight decline in viewership for Street Fighter V. Next up, World of Warcraft. There was $740,000 in prizing in 2018. One thing that's interesting about World of Warcraft is that there are very, very few major tournaments. But when they do happen, you can easily see 40 or even 60,000 plus concurrent viewers tuning in to watch World of Warcraft Arena. It's just really few and far between. So if you're tuning in for BlizzCon or BlizzCon qualifiers or something in between, you might actually catch quite a few viewers, but good luck finding those tournaments. Next up is PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. So PUBG League was supposed to be one of the next big things in esports when it launched last year. Unfortunately, Fortnite kind of just came out of nowhere and swooped up all of the hype and all of the viewership for the Battle Royale genre. We actually saw a couple of PUBG tournaments get in the 70 to 100 or even more thousand concurrent viewer ranges. And this was not celebrity or pro or streamer tournaments. These were open events with qualifiers and things like that. And it got quite good viewership. However, kind of unfortunate to say that PUBG League has fallen on its face. We've seen even opening day broadcasts as low as 10,000 or less concurrent viewers, and that's not good for a scene with so much money, so much prize pools, and actually still one of the top games on Steam today. All right, Magic the Gathering. You know, honestly, I wrote this list like 2 days ago, and I might actually need to bump Magic the Gathering up 5 or 6 rungs, or even more potentially on this list, because one of the first events in the Magic the Gathering arena, that's the video game version, so yes, this is an esport. One of the most recent events at PAX East, going on right now as I record this video, has reached over 100,000 concurrent viewers with $1 million in prizing. So if I'm being quite honest, this should be way higher up on the list. There are a lot of questions we'll see if this can sustain, as this is really the first event of the season and the first major event for this particular iteration of Magic the Gathering. Next up is FIFA. I'll admit this is not a game I know a ton about, specifically the esports scene. We've seen the MLS start quite recently and reach pretty good viewership marks, but again, it feels very inconsistent. When do you see these broadcasts? When do they... You know what? I don't know enough about FIFA. I feel like I'm probably saying something incorrect. It did have $2.2 million in prizing in 2018. Maybe this one needs to be a little higher too. Sorry, guys. All right, next up, Quake Champions. Quake has such a dear place in my heart. Quake is what got me into this industry, specifically QuakeCon. attending QuakeCon was in 2009 and 2010 let me make the connections that got me a job in esports. Quake 1v1 is it's a beautiful game. And the skill ceiling is just ridiculous. Unfortunately, Quake Champions, especially the esports side of Quake Champions, could not have started off more poorly. They announced Quake Champions at E3, I think it was maybe 2016 or 2017. And then they announced a $1 million prize pool esports event, which took place when the game was still in beta. It wasn't even an open beta. This is just one of the huge mistakes in esports history as far as I can tell. But also the other problem with Quake Champions is it's really just Quake with another skin. It's just Quake again. And unfortunately, as much as I hate to say this, Quake isn't what kids want to play these days. The skill ceiling is there. The level of competition is there. You still see old school names like Rafa, the best Quake player of all time, still winning tournaments. But unfortunately, unless something huge happens, Quake Champions just doesn't have the player base to sustain a bigger esport. All right, next up on the list is Tekken. Now, I think this is where I would consider we go into the tier 3 esports. Tier 2 is most of the pack. I think tier 3 still has some very legitimate titles with legitimate qualification seasons that go throughout the entire year, prize pools, things like that. Tekken, $270,000 of prizing in 2018 with the Tekken World Tour. It's a well-produced, well-organized, year-long scheduled event, very similar to Capcom Pro Tour in how how the structure is built, in that you have qualifiers at existing fighting game tournaments across the globe, and those qualifiers allow you to qualify into the Tekken World Tour global finals at the end of the year. Tekken's great. I think the new Tekken is probably the best Tekken we've seen in a long time. The graphics are beautiful. The gameplay is high skilled, but unfortunately, fighting games just aren't watched very much right now. It can still get 20, 30,000 concurrent viewers. I think the grand finals last year peaked at around 40 to 50,000 concurrent viewers, which is kind of sad. I wish it was higher. These games have very international player bases with players from Korea, Japan, Brazil, all across Europe, America, of course. But unfortunately, fighting games just haven't been doing particularly well from a viewership perspective over the last couple of years. Okay, next one is Halo. Man, what happened to you, Halo? You used to be such a premier esports title. In the MLG days, Halo was one of, if not the top esports title in North America. This is a bygone era, mind you. But, man, Halo just does not seem to have any steam behind its esports title or esports community right now. We even saw as much as $1.9 million in prizing go into the Halo season last year, but unfortunately, the viewership just hasn't been there. All right, this next title I think has got to be, out of every single esports title we've talked about, the one that has dropped by far the most in the rankings, and that is Hearthstone. Hearthstone, as an esport, as a streaming game on Twitch, it's been one of the top 10, top 5 games even since it came out. But even as an esport, for the first couple of years, Hearthstone tournaments could extremely consistently get 70,000, 100,000, or even more concurrent viewership for their major events. These days, there's fewer and further between esports events. Of course, we all kind of heard about those unfortunate Activision Blizzard layoffs that cut a lot of the teams that were working on these games, but also on the esports side of things. I personally know a couple people who are impacted by that. And Hearthstone now is kind of in not a great state in terms of the hype behind the esports scene. I think Magic the Gathering has really taken a lot of the steam. Artifact, not so much, but Hearthstone has dropped from, honestly, you could have argued Hearthstone was the top 5 esport titles in previous years. Now, I put it below 20. Mobile esports. Now, this is a realm I also know absolutely nothing about, so I'm probably totally butchering this. but I definitely felt like we needed to include Clash Royale. We've seen lots of broadcasts for this game throughout the years, getting 100,000 plus concurrent viewers, but I can't remember the last time I saw that. I think it's probably much bigger in Asia than it is in the Western world in terms of an esports perspective, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it somewhere on this list. And please feel free to correct me if you think it should be much higher, because I probably am missing something huge here. Next up, we have Warcraft 3. Warcraft 3 is kind of making a mini resurgence, primarily in China, but I still think it's worth noting because Warcraft 3 Reforged is the updated graphical version of Warcraft that is coming, I think, later this year, and the game has been quietly and slowly picking up steam from an esports perspective. It looks like there was less than 100,000. Oh, excuse me. There was about 200,000 in prize money last year in Warcraft 3, and most of that's probably China, but at least something that you should keep on your radar. Okay, this next one is another fighting game right at the bottom of my list, unfortunately for the Dragon Ball FighterZ fans. And also, I guess, Marvel vs. Capcom fans, too, because in a way, DBZ FighterZ was supposed to be, in a lot of people's minds, like the spiritual successor, sort of, to Marvel vs. Capcom. And when it first came out, viewership was great for this title. I mean, Dragon Ball is such a great franchise. The action was there. It was a beautiful game to watch. And it was one of the most, in fact, it had the highest entrance at EVO this year, I think, out of any the year that it came out, out of any other game. But man, what has happened to Dragon Ball FighterZ? It has a consistent year-long league structure. It has the Dragon Ball FighterZ World Tour, which had a decent amount of prize money. And again, very similar to Tekken World Tour, very similar to Capcom Pro Tour, consistent events taking place at all of the biggest fighting game majors throughout the year and throughout the world. But sadly, for whatever reason, viewership has plummeted for this game. It's nothing close of what it used to be, and unfortunately, it just is barely making this list. All right, the last one is a real sad one. Heroes of the Storm. I wasn't a big Heroes of the Storm player or watcher, but this is an esport that actually has dropped into the RIP category. It is no longer. It is dead. Blizzard laid off everyone working on the game, essentially. Blizzard and Activision completely canceled the esports league for the game. I have friends who worked on that team. It is sad. It is dead. We saw $5.3 million in prize money for Heroes of the Storm last year. They tried so hard to make this a legitimate big esports title, and they were successful in getting it to the top 10. But this year, it is no longer. That rounds out the list. I'm going to throw in some honorable mentions and some questions. Apex, obviously, it's the biggest game that everyone's talking about right now, biggest game on Twitch. Will we see an esports league for Apex? It's inevitable. We'll see some kind of esports something for Apex this year, but no clue at all what that looks like. Speedrunning. Is speedrunning esports? I personally think that speedrunning is arguably an esports genre, because the genesis of esports back in the arcade days was man versus machine. It was getting high scores on Donkey Kong. I see that as the genesis of esports, and what's different about speedrunning today than those high score junkies? It's man versus machine. How can you beat a game as quickly as possible? Of course, it feels and looks a lot more like esports when you have speedrun races, which I personally love. Ninja Gaiden races have been amazing at GDQs in the past. Mario 64 races, Ocarina of Time races. Beautiful to see. There aren't a lot of events that do races with like prize money and things like that, but also one that I would definitely consider for your list of esports titles. And I think that pretty much covers it. Guys, what did you think of this list? This was a super long and rambling video. I know I got tons of things wrong, and I apologize. I didn't have time to do a shit ton of research for this, so this is mainly built off knowledge that I've accumulated over the years of working at Twitch and just being in esports. Obviously, I'm just going to say it again, this is incredibly subjective and incredibly just my personal take on what matters and what's happening right now in each individual community. But if you have any thoughts or opinions, did I forget an esport title? Do you think I'm just completely dead wrong about the top 5 or the 25th title on my list? Give me a comment and let me know. I would love to hear from you. That's going to do it for my second ever YouTube video. This is the second one. Came out really, really long. If you watched the whole thing up until this point, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And as a special bonus to everyone who did watch to this point, I'm going to drop a link to a Google Doc in the comments below or the description below that actually has links and information about every single esports title that I talked about today and even more. It's going to give you links to the schedules and things like that. So if you want to dive into each individual esport, you can do so there. If you like this video, love it if you could subscribe and give me a like. And hopefully there will be more of these coming in the future. I don't have a ton of free time right now, but if I find myself on a Sunday like today with a couple hours of free time, I may as well do one of these videos. All right, thank you so much. We'll see you in the next one.